of paper and told to summarize quickly and then open it up for questions and answers. So I just wanted to say it's been a real pleasure listening to these people, and I hope you've got a sense that this is something serious. This is something serious that affects all of you. It affects all of us. It affects our country. As Americans, we have a right to free speech. We have a right to practice our religion as we think best. And the government should not be telling us how we should do that. And if they don't like our ideas or they don't like the way we practice our religion, they shouldn't be locking us up in jail. They shouldn't be isolating us. They shouldn't be putting us in units where we are tortured in solitary confinement for years at a time until we're too deranged to defend ourselves and have to plead guilty. These are all things that belong to completely foreign, alien notions of justice. And I hope it all offends you as much as it offends us. There's the famous saying, I know you've all heard it, but I'm going to repeat it here again because I think it's important. First they came for the Jews, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to defend me. That was said by Pastor Niemöller during the time of the Nazis. But in a very weird way, it applies today. That's why Tom, there's no distance between us because we see that there is no difference between what they're doing to the Muslims and what they're doing to the peace activists and what they will do to the labor. The National Coalition for the Protection of Civil Freedoms is going to try to attack this from a legislative basis. This is a horrible, horrible trying to try to get any bill passed in the legislature or Congress, but we're going to try to do it anyway. We have a couple of them. One is we want to amend the material support statutes to say that you cannot be convicted of material support for terrorism unless you intend to engage in terrorism. Duh, right? This is pretty obvious. It's going to be hard to get through Congress, but this is something you must talk to your individual congressperson about. And I hope every one of you will go down and talk to your congressperson about it. It happens that the Patriot Act is up for renewal in May, and there is a fix that was made by Senator Feingold called the Justice Act. And part of the Justice Act is to correct this material support for terrorism, and so I hope you tell all of your legislators, do not reauthorize the Patriot Act until you have passed the Justice Act with a fix. We also, of course, like the resolution on special prosecutors to get all these poor people out of jail for the suffering that they're undergoing. We want to have a bill that will stop SAMs. No one should ever have to go to be stuck in solitary confinement for years before trial when they're presumed guilty. What an outrage. What an absolute outrage. And we want to shut down the communication management unit. In this country, there is no excuse under any circumstances for ethnic prisons. The only other one we ever did was interning the Japanese during World War II, and we've been apologizing for it ever since. Again, it's an outrage. So those are three things. The last thing I just wanted to mention was immigration. We treat foreign immigrants, undocumented workers, about the same as Muslims. They're put into, once they're picked up, they're put into deportation centers, essentially under isolation and prevented from having adequate legal support, and their families are ripped apart, and it's simply a continuation of the same problem. So we want to have legislation that will correct that. And these are things I think you need to talk to your legislator about. But most important, there's one thing that is absolutely important. It's the last thing I'll say, and then I'll get out of questions. All of this is driven by fear. And I'm sure all of you out there sense that fear. Islamophobia. And you see people like Peter King out there trying to rev up the Islamophobia. It is no longer possible for any of us to remain silent. You have to go out and talk to your friends and your right-wing brother-in-law and your crazy aunt and say, stop it. Stop this Islamophobia. Let's sit down and talk about what it really means. Because if we are not willing to speak up, if we're saying we are not Muslim, so we don't have to say anything, we are leading our own selves down the path, because eventually there will be nobody to speak for the rest of us. And I hope you all understand how really, really important that is. And on that very grim note, let me ask, do you have any questions of the panel? Oh my God, I hope I haven't scared everybody. I wasn't pretending to do that. Yes?
How many of these people that we see here, the names, like I know about Samuel Arian that he was released. How many of these are released now?
Some of them are released. I have to just say Samuel Arian is not released. He is in the middle of a trial, actually, in a weird way. He got into the middle of the trial, and then there was a motion made to dismiss on the grounds essentially about wages, governmental misconduct. And the judge, who's a very good judge, took it under advisement and said, while I'm considering the decision, I will release you under house arrest, but you cannot leave your daughter's apartment in Virginia. And she has not made a decision for 2 years, over 2 years, 2.5 years. So he is now trapped in his daughter's apartment for 2.5 years, in the middle of a trial.
I thought he was teaching somewhere in the Middle East.
No, and I have to say, I like to call myself a very good friend of Samuel Arian. I see him from time to time. He is a brilliant man, a very courageous man, extremely compassionate man, and one who has the deepest, best interests of America at heart. And he is trapped in his daughter's apartment, and last time I saw him, he said, I'm suffocating here. I gotta get out of it.
There's a co-defendant that's been released with some impunity.
Oh.
With a co-defendant in the trial.
But he's not released then. I thought he was somewhere in the Middle East, no?
Most of the people are not released. There are some of the very early ones, like the Lackawanna 6, I think have gotten out now. They've just been released. And there's a few others on the board that have gotten out. And then there's some over there I put on the backside. I thought the board was a little bit too grim, so I put a few that actually beat the charges in one way or another. There was a couple of cases in which they were able to get past the charges, and so they are out. But for the most part, I would say 85% probably are still in jail, and some are there for life.
Yeah, I think that a lot of, I was reminded when we were talking about the treatment of a lot of these folks, about environmental and animal rights activists who are also sort of disproportionately targeted with agent provocateurs and infiltrators, disproportionate sentences, and villainization and communication management units, things like that. So when we're talking about social justice, almost all of these people are social justice activists or involved in some sort of social justice movement. Do you see opportunities, I guess this is for any panelists, opportunities for interstruggle solidarity, opportunities for change across coalition boundaries or lines of struggle that are intersecting or fluid or things like that?
The question was that since, well, first let me say thank you very much for the point you were making, which is that I've only been talking about Muslims and peace activists, but in fact, the government hasn't been thinking that way. They're also going after environmentalists. Environmentalists are very dangerous people. They've got philosophies. They actually think. And they can do all sorts of damage to corporations that corporations may not like. So they have been ending up in the CMUs. Animal rights activists are even worse. They have their own special terrorism statute. So they are also been targeted. And I assume that there will be other similar ones like this. It turns out, as the way the government is presently structured, you can do almost anything as long as you call it terrorism related. And terrorism, of course, is a very broad, vague concept. It's any violence or threat of violence or illegality in order to affect government decisions. So blocking traffic in order to make a point about a local law or something could very well be considered terrorism. And I think you'll see more and more of this. More and more groups will be called terrorism groups because that's a lot of money is there, there's a lot of power there, and so on. And I think we have to fight back about that. I mean, I absolutely agree. The environmentalists should be part of this discussion. The peace people should be part of this discussion. The Muslims, the animal rights activists, all of us have the same central interest in making sure that the government stops demonizing people who are not terrorists.